Good morning. So we briefly spoke on the phone about a week ago, and at this point, the federal government was about to shut down, which means that the 4 million CalFresh recipients in California were likely to not get any of their expected benefits October 1st. The federal government was also about to declare disaster zones in numerous California counties. So my first question that I would love to talk through is how is your week this week?
Well, it's certainly much better since Congress passed a continuing resolution yesterday evening.
We got a couple months.
Right, so we have put off this crisis till mid-December. There's still a crisis coming. And on Tuesday, we began doing disaster CalFresh issuance in Lake County. Today, I believe we're starting in Calaveras County. So despite all of the disruptions and craziness, all of the work continues. And the thing I'm happiest about is the 4 million people who receive benefits under the CalFresh program got their benefits loaded this morning, and they are fully available to them for the month.
Whew.
Yeah.
Okay, you've had a good week. This week is better than last.
Right.
So I wanted to start by giving this audience a little bit of context. So social services, especially in California, but also nationally, has gone through significant cultural transformation in the last 10, 20 years. And you are in a very unique perspective. You've been involved all the way through that from different perspectives. You started on the nonprofit side, worked in counties for a long time, and now you're at the state. I would love if you could share a little bit of what that change looked like. What did it feel like? What was happening when you were director in Santa Clara, San Francisco, and what is happening now?
There are several cultural things that have been changing in this period, both because policy's been changing, but also I think because our knowledge and our understanding and our willingness to know and understand is changing. I remember sort of when I first went to Santa Cruz County as Human Services Director there, one of the things we did very early was we increased the recruitment of bilingual, bicultural staff because of the demographics of the community. And then even after we'd done that, I was hearing sort of concern from the Latino community about what they felt was a disrespectful or non-supportive system. And it took not the longest time, but it took a while to decode what was going on. And to decode it and translate it, by example, we had taught the staff to be polite, to use the formal forms of address, ustedes, not tú, señor, señora, not first names until invited. Yet there was this tension. And when you looked at the interaction, you had someone standing there saying, "We've come because we need food." You had a worker very respectfully saying, "I'm sorry, we've reviewed your circumstances and you're not eligible." And the person was saying, "But the child's hungry." And the worker was saying, "But you're not eligible." And right there you had a collision of cultures, one of which was rules-based and the other of which was first generation from a culture of negotiation. And we can look back at that culture of negotiation and say, well, that may be in some ways illegitimate, or it may have a degree of sort of corruption or something attached to it. But it was reasonable people dealing with other people in a reasonable way and not withholding the support and assistance they could give. And it was a jarring contrast for the person who was on the asking side of the interaction. Later, as we sort of moved into, for both better and worse, the era of welfare reform, we were changing the paradigm to say our goal is to, within the time available to the people we're serving, meet their needs, provide what they need in order to make transitions to the labor market. And I remember at that point I was in San Francisco, relatively early there, meeting with staff and trying to explain this model. And in one staff interaction, staff person said something like, "So you're saying do whatever they need by any means possible?" And I was sort of saying yes. And the person said, "Does the mayor know you're saying this?" And went on to say, you know, any number of directors have stood where you're standing right now, frequently in quick succession, telling us exactly the opposite. that our job was to be gatekeepers. Our job was to protect the benefits. And you're saying make them available as fast as possible, speed the interactions, and on a fairly generous basis, just make supportive services available.
Yep.
So writ large, that's been a transformation going on now for a number of years, and it is still the conflict of a rules-based, means-tested system in which the public is not universally sympathetic to what we're doing, that is trying to meet human needs on a real-time basis with a minimum of delay bureaucracy or attention capture where we're disrupting people's best thinking capacity.
Absolutely. It sounds like from the on-the-ground staff's perspective, the switch from paper, people come in, determination comes out. That is a totally different job than help this person by any means possible. Here are some tools you have in the programs. Did the mayor know you were saying this?
Absolutely.
He did.
It was Willie Brown. I mean,
Okay.
It was, hey, help him well. Good.
Okay, so that's great context. And I think there's even been, in the last couple of years, healthcare reform has moved that forward in a whole new way. Could you say a little bit about what's happened over the last couple of years in terms of the change of goals and the cultural change that that's brought with it?
Of course, the move in healthcare to the ACA has been moving to a culture of coverage as opposed to a culture of eligibility. Now, just to clarify something, the actual administration of the Medicaid program is in the Department of Healthcare Services. However, our counties, through the Human Service System Network, do the eligibility, still do the
totally
eligibility
unrelated, right? Eligibility for the program and doing the actual program. Yeah,
right.
Two separate departments should do that.
Two universes. We should always make life confusing. But that movement to a culture of coverage has been part of the culture change building in the county human service system because we deliver most of our services through the counties. That has, I think, helped move this needle towards our goal is to meet people's needs and do it as quickly as we possibly can.
Yep. Great background. So one thing I want to pull out is that I think a lot of people in this audience and a lot of people working in civic tech generally, the most common government services we interact with are things like the DMV or the park system or transit, when there is really there's a huge ecosystem of critical government services that we don't interact with frequently or if at all. And so I would love to get your perspective on, in your world, what you see as some of the biggest opportunities to either improve government service delivery or specifically government digital services. What are the big opportunities that you see in your world?
I think the most immediate ones, and I know yesterday you did a presentation on the work Code for America has been doing with counties and us on sort of the CalFresh program. And I think going further down that path is one of the most opportune, and we're grateful for the relationship. We have what I sort of characterize in California as something of the California conundrum. And if I can figure out how to make this work, I'm going to show two slides only.
So I think hop forward one more.
Okay, here we go. This is our bad news slide. It shows the...
Can anybody find California?
Anyone find California? We're second from the bottom, which means that of the 50 states, the percentage of people who are eligible for CalFresh benefits in 2012, we had the lowest percentage in the country. That's not good. That is people who are not getting nutrition services that would benefit their families. Now, we actually just got a letter yesterday from federal government to the governor saying, congratulations, you've made the biggest progress in the country. We're giving you a bonus award. Your percentages have gone up, but not nearly enough. Here comes the next slide. This is the conundrum. This is the percentage of poor families with children who are being covered in state TANF programs. TANF is what took the place of AFDC under welfare reform. It's, again, top to bottom, but this is from bad to good, top to bottom. or I would say from bad to good. So in California, something like 65% of the families with children in poverty receive TANF assistance. And that goes, and you can sort of see up the chart how much smaller that gets. That's not to say California is so good, it's to say they're so bad, or at least shame on them. But the conundrum is, obviously, there's a very high penetration rate in one program and not in the other. Is there a relationship between these two facts? There could be, which is as a large cash assistance program remains in place, if you will, the taint or the association or the concern that somehow participating in the program is welfare-like increases. And without in any way meaning to approve of it, one of the factors definitely in our culture is that social citizenship is earned and that work is considered good and benefits are considered bad. And so one of the things that, as I think of how we work in the future together, is what mechanisms does the digital community have to reposition services like the CalFresh program in front of people who are eligible for it but not using it in a way that is more normalized and that does not have any sort of conception of taint, but rather it is a work support available for low-income working families who, because our minimum wage is not nearly high enough, can't support their families without this additional benefit. And somehow, working together, we have to find out how we reach that population. I wasn't able to be here yesterday, but I was sort of watching bits of the feed from the app and then some of the Twitter comments, and I noticed one of the things that Libby Schaaf had talked about when she was here was the high percentage of low-income youth and families who are using digital communication means. And I think all of that speaks to the opportunity that we have to normalize, popularize, and attach as simply as we can and as quickly as we can.
And building on the concept of stigma and how digital tools can potentially erode that a little bit, I think one of the observations we've had in our work so far is that stigma is both created and eroded at the point of service delivery. Yes. And if you can really improve the service delivery experience, that's like the main opportunity you have to erode the stigma in the program. So I'm really excited to work on that stuff together. So I know one of your, probably the reason you're in the field to begin with is that really you've grown out of like building an excellent foster care system. I know you've been working on a lot of these issues recently. I was wondering if you could walk us through a little bit of some of the big opportunities there, and in particular kind of how it works now and what you see as the vision for how it could work in the future.
This is one of, from my perspective, the biggest things we have to work on in the next couple of years. We're undertaking a really pretty major reform of the foster care system in California, primarily with the goal of not having children and youth served for any extensive periods of time in congregate care, group homes, etc. Fulfilling that means that we have to have a good supply of quality foster family homes as alternatives, and particularly foster family homes that are able to serve latency age and adolescent kids. When I think of how we have historically recruited those families, we've done it through tabling at the county fairs, the leafleting at church events, flyers in the church basement, etc. And it has, it's produced some wonderful people who have come forward under wonderful circumstances. But I remember hearing a former foster youth, Antoine Fisher, once saying, I only ever saw outreach for foster parents in bus cards and in laundromats, so I figured you wanted parents who didn't have cars or washing machines. We've got to come to a new way of determining who would be the foster parent of the future, what their interests are, how we reach them, how we position it to them, and how we engage them without sort of the awful, big-eye kid, mawkish appeal, which ultimately is trying to appeal to sort of a rescue mentality, which is not necessarily healthy when you're trying to serve a youth who has a history of trauma and is going to need a lot of sort of therapeutic support. So as I look to our potential relationship with the digital communities, I'm sort of, one of the questions I've got is how do we identify who will be the good foster parent of the future? How do we engage them? How do we encourage them? How do we answer their questions in real time? How do we respond to them on their time frames, not our convenience? And then when they actually connect to us and touch our offices and touch our staff, how do we continue the same quality of responsive, timely, respectful engagement that, in fact, their experiences are getting better and better and better at every step rather than becoming frustrating?
And I think it's one of the rare opportunities in what we would call broadly civic tech, where if we do this right, it could easily be the most meaningful experience someone ever has in their life. And rather than like feeling like you have to move through different layers of a bureaucratic process, you would look back as the best experience you've ever had. We have very little time today, and I want to make, this is a selfish question. So there are many young professionals in the audience who are starting careers in technology and government and some intersection in between. What is one thing you really wish you knew at the beginning of your career? What's one thing you wish you knew when you were 30?
Well, I think I'm going to answer that there are three things I wished I knew.
Okay.
The first thing I wished I knew was that being a director means the problems come to you. And so there's lots of fun in the job, but there's also, you're the person where the problems come, because they will otherwise be fixed elsewhere. Second thing I wished I'd known at that point was the fact that while there is policy and advocacy work that you can do from the public sector, it's limited. And it is while you're in the private sector, in the advocacy community, that real policy change can be pressed forward. I think the most satisfying work I did before moving from the private to the public wasn't the wonderful services Catholic Charities operated, and we did some fabulous services. It was the organizing we did that had the church community support the rent control and condominium conversion control movement in San Francisco. And I deeply regret that Ellis Act and other things have undermined that since. And the work that the church was able to do with the civic community around sanctuary for Central American refugees when the civil wars were raging there. So that level of advocacy is not something that can be done from within governmental organization. It must come from outside. Third thing that I really wished I'd known was to become myself personally much more familiar with what is now the details of coding and technology and digital competence. Because as government, what and this is partly we've learned in our dialogues with Code for America, is that we have so outsourced our ability to do that work that we are really not able to be nimble, quick, flexible, and responsive as we should be. Instead, we're really reliant on third-party vendors, we're reliant on system integrators, and on our best days, we're project managers. What we're not able to do is...
this is the only audience in the world that will give you applause.
I know. I will go back to Sacramento and get trashed for that line. But I wish somehow we're going to have to rebuild that within public side. And the partnership that I'm hoping that we're moving into is sort of beginning the migration of that capacity and knowledge through partnership and ultimately re-embedding it in the public sector side.
I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. The fact that you're here speaks hugely to the potential impact of this movement and everybody in the room. Thank you a ton for your time, and thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.